I would like to thank our partners that extended their support to this event. Associate partners MENA Clean Energy Business Council, CETA EV Charger, who is also the panel sponsor on day one. Supporting associations: the European Association for Electromobility, Electric Drive Transportation Association, Electric Vehicle Association of Thailand. And the supporting partners: Qatar Solar Energy, Fin Value, Electroheads, the Brattle Group, Rare Group, A Great E Incorporated, and our media partner, Circuit Digest.
Thanks for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'll give a very high-level overview about what's happening across the MENA region in terms of electric vehicles, and I believe my colleagues in the following sessions will dive into what's happening in Qatar and how Qatar can actually use this as an opportunity, given the different events happening in Qatar this year specifically. Just a very quick introduction about the organization I work for. So I work with the Clean Energy Business Council, CEBC. We are not-for-profit membership organization based out of Dubai here in the UAE, but we cover Middle East and North Africa. And what CEBC does in a nutshell is we are the voice of the private sector when we speak to the governments. So we try to act as a platform to bring both public and private sectors together to really accelerate the policy maturity across different clean energy topics. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, these are the topics we cover at CEBC, starting from finance, really looking at how we can accelerate more access to financing for the different clean energy projects, including electric mobility. Then we have low carbon hydrogen, blue and green hydrogen, energy storage, women in clean energy, energy efficiency, and the most relevant one for this conference is future mobility, specifically right now focusing on electric passenger vehicles. And we also publish a lot of research. So if I assume the fact you are here today, that means you are interested in Qatar, but you might also be interested in the UAE. So we recently published a white paper. It's actually a very short white paper about what's happening in the UAE in terms of electric vehicles, the current policy landscape, the challenges, the opportunities, etc. And you can find that on the CEBC website. We also organize a lot of events at CEBC. If you are outside the UAE, we organize a lot of webinars. If you are inside the UAE, we organize a lot of in-person events, and we have one next week actually at Expo here in Dubai. So if you are here in Dubai, you might be interested to check out that event on the CEBC website as well. So I spend most of the time on that slide, but I actually mentioned a few things that you might not see in the slides. Just a very quick overview, what's happening across the region. Perhaps each country has been looking at e-mobility in a different way, and they take advantage of the e-mobility transition from a specific angle. So UAE, I think very similar to Qatar somehow, although UAE has been the leading country in the region in terms of the adoption and the policies for EVs. We can't compare with Europe or the US or China, but we just comparing relatively between the different countries across the region. There's still a lot of work that has to be done in every single country. So right now, UAE is, if you are not familiar with the demographics of the UAE, it's very similar to the United States, where you have different states, which are the Emirates. So you have 7 Emirates, and each emirate mostly has its own regulations, incentives, etc. So Dubai has been the leading emirate in terms of providing incentives for the end users. Just to give you a few examples, right now, if you have an EV in Dubai, you can charge it completely for free in the public charging stations that you can find across the emirate of Dubai, which are about 700 to 800 charging stations, public ones. 50% of that was almost installed by the government. And if you also have parking for free, if you can park in most of the public places, which other cars would have to pay for that. And these are the main 2 incentives for EVs. There are very, very small other incentives, but I think these are the major ones. Across the other emirates, I think there's no clear incentives, but there is a specific regulatory framework, for example, for the tariff for charging, etc. But there's other challenges which I speak about at the end of the presentation. And in terms of the numbers for the adoption of EVs in the UAE, again, it's the highest per capita across the region. So you have about 6,000 electric vehicles in the country right now. 80 to 85% of that is actually only in Dubai. And most of these vehicles are also Tesla, which is some people might actually think that's a good thing, but these vehicles are, the owners of these EVs are, it's mostly their second or third car. So it doesn't really achieve the purpose why we're electrifying mobility generally as well. If you go to Saudi Arabia, I think there's some common areas between Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Morocco, which is the focus on manufacturing and localizing the industry. Egypt has been taking the lead somehow by the different announcements. So they have a partnership with, I think it was a Chinese company, but I just read in the news about 2 days ago that partnership with the Chinese is not more active, but it's a different company. But the point is they are establishing a factory to manufacture electric vehicles in Egypt. And the purpose of this EVs is to be provided through a special interest loan to the taxi drivers. And that would be beginning of 2024. And then you have also, they are looking at manufacturing the EV charging infrastructure as well in Egypt. There's still not something that we can see and buy, but it's all announcements and with some progress of launching a pilot, etc. So far. But in terms of infrastructure, I think Egypt, they have a few of the private investors, they have took the lead already and installed a good number of charging stations across the strategic locations across the country. So you can actually drive from Cairo to through the north, the Red Sea coast now without having to worry about the charging, and also to the Red Sea, the White Sea coast as well, till Al Alamein, which is a new city on the White Sea coast. But generally, I think they have about, if I'm not mistaken, about 200 charging stations across Egypt. And I think the good thing about Egypt is those charging stations are strategically located. So there is some kind of studies that have been done before actually installing the charging stations, which is somehow a challenge in the UAE. You might find a place with too many charging stations, where there's another place that's very intense in terms of the population, where you can find or you can barely find a charging station. Saudi Arabia, with the recent investment in Lucid Motors, which is one of the leading EV startups from the US. And part of that is they are actually going to build a manufacturing plant in Saudi Arabia. So that explains also the angle that Saudi Arabia is looking at EVs. And I think about 2 weeks ago, the mayor of Riyadh announced that by 2030, they will have 30% of the cars on the city of Riyadh will be electric. So that's also a good announcement. It only covers Riyadh, not Saudi Arabia as a whole, but I think it gives a good sign in terms of the transition. Morocco, they already have a manufacturing plant for batteries. And I think there's an announcement that there will be a manufacturing plant for EVs also by Stellantis by 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So I think those are the main leading countries in the same order I mentioned. The other countries, there's some very small steps, but we don't see any major change of the way they are looking at EVs yet. So hopefully, from our discussions, we think there will be some good announcements and consideration from these countries very soon as well. So those are slides I'll share with the organizers. You can all can have access to them. Basically, each slide goes in a little bit more details about the countries, each country in the region. But I want to just mention briefly the common challenges that we identified across the different countries. Of course, each country would have its own unique challenges, but generally, what we can see across the region is there's lack of government support and political will in most of the countries. I think part of that because there's lack of understanding what is really an EV and how it can actually contribute to the cutting emissions and also to the economy. Right now, you don't have one single country that you can see is leading manufacturer of EVs and the technology. China maybe is starting to be that country. But there's a lot of economical opportunities for the countries as well to take or get a piece of this as well. So we think the main issue is that lack of government support, especially for this region where you have the policies are coming from top down. So once you have the government policies put in place, things move way faster than otherwise. And accordingly, you have very low incentives. You either have no incentives in most of the countries, or the ones who introduced incentives, it's a very, very weak. And if you look at the other countries globally who have a high number of EVs, it's mainly because of the fiscal incentives, whether it's tax reductions or direct fiscal incentives, which is something that we don't see yet in the region. And we don't expect that to happen, or we don't expect to see that anytime soon as well. So I think at the same time, you find that the oil prices are very, very cheap. So people don't really feel that from cost perspective, they have to convert or go to EVs. So there have to be different kind of incentives or removal of subsidies for fossil fuels, which surprisingly, it's the first time this discussion is put to the public during COP26 this year. So hopefully that could be something considered as well to incentivize people to actually pay, go for EVs. Then you have lack of awareness. So Dubai is, as a city, it's actually the second most intense city in terms of the charging stations per cars globally. And a lot of people in Dubai, for example, when you ask them why you don't buy an EV, they think there's range anxiety, there's lack of infrastructure, etc., which is not true if you want to buy a car now with the current infrastructure. So there's a lot of lack of awareness about the existing infrastructure, the existing options of EVs that they can buy in the market, the capabilities of these EVs, and what they can do. And what we used to do in the past is we actually take people from the public and electric vehicle exhibitions. So they actually get behind the wheel for a couple of days and they get the full experience. And people love it. Like at the end of these expeditions, the companies actually get a good number of leads for people who are actually very interested because they have tried the experience and now they can see how much different it is. And they can try and see the infrastructure that's currently available for them as well. So I think there's a lot of work that has to be done in raising the awareness of the public about the current available models and the infrastructure as well. The charging still has to be strategically planned. I think that's one key issue because, and I focus also on the charging management and the software side. Is very important. As the number of vehicles grow, you will need to manage the charging stations and have live visibility for the charging stations to provide convenience to the end users as well. I think that's somehow overlooked in the region now, and which is understandable. You will only get to feel that issue once you have an issue with the availability of the charging stations, which I think soon people will feel that as well. And of course, because there's no clear incentives for the OEMs to introduce their vehicles to the region or to a new market, because there's a lot of investment that's associated with that. And accordingly, there has to be some incentives from the governments to encourage these companies to do so. And since that doesn't exist yet, so now you see a very limited number of options for the end user to actually choose from. And I think generally, the more options you have, the more price options also you have, the higher the number of sales eventually would be by nature. And then we think there's a lot of opportunities, let's say, at the same time for EVs in this region. Generally, so you have very cheap cost of renewables, which means you can provide clean and green electricity for very cheap prices compared with other regions, because that's a very active argument around whether EVs are actually green or not, etc. And it comes out to the point where the electricity is coming from. So here you can produce very cheap renewable, and accordingly you can produce or provide very cheap clean energy, clean electricity for those vehicles. The other thing, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's no one country that's currently the lead on the EV manufacturing and different components of it. So there's a lot of opportunity for the countries across the region to make use of that as well. The third thing is in some countries where the electricity and the stabilization of the grid is an issue, EVs could actually provide, once you have VTG or vehicle to grid, more commercial, could provide a system stabilization to the whole grid as well. The last point is we have seen that EVs in some countries, they actually reactivate some innovative business models, which eventually will lead to the curbing the demand for travel generally. So you have the electric scooters, which are now alternative for people for the first last mile trips. So you don't have to use your own car. Instead, you can make the trip to the public transportation more convenient, and the different models as well. And we have seen recently that even the shared mobility companies are also moving to electrifying their fleet. So I think electrification of the fleet could be a key enabler for some of the innovative business models as well. So that's my overview. I hope I didn't spend more than I should have. And so everyone, again, as I mentioned, we are doing a lot of research currently on EVs and across the different countries in the region. So please do check out the website www.cebcmena.com. And we will have very soon a map where you actually can check every country and you can filter what information you need to know about the EV development across each country. So within the next 2 weeks, you should be able to find that on the website. So please keep an eye as well. And with that, I would like to conclude and give it back to the organizers. Thank you for having me.